Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm up in Canada today visiting Marstar and taking a look at some of the submachine guns that they have in their inventory and reference collection. Today, specifically, we have a Yugoslav model of 49/57, and it is distinctive primarily for how much it looks like a Soviet PPSh-41. However, what's most interesting about it is how much different it actually is in terms of mechanics and manufacture. So, this handles just like a PPSh, it fires just like a PPSh, it uses, in fact, exactly the same magazines as a PPSh. We have a 35-round stick mag in it here. It will also take 71-round drum magazines. And these were put into production by Yugoslavia apparently in 1948 and then officially designated the Model 49 the next year. And they went through a number of different iterations of them. So this is the last iteration, a model of 1957, and it's marked here on the receiver, 49/57. And by this point, they'd done some things to simplify the manufacture, although it's still made completely differently than the Soviet PPSh. These were used by the Yugoslav military. They were also manufactured for export. I don't know exactly how many they managed to export, but they did offer them for sale. It is chambered for the 7.62 Tokarev cartridge. They did apparently actually offer it in 9mm parabellum, although I don't think they got any substantial orders for it in that caliber. Now, I think we should just dive right in and take this apart so I can show you what makes it really interesting. So let's start with a comparison here. This is a PPSh-41. This is a Yugo 49/57. Obviously, the basic layout is identical. The grip assembly, the grip shape is pretty much the same. The trigger guard, the safety is, or the fire selector, I'm sorry, is pretty much exactly the same. We have the same basic layout when it comes to the magazine wells. Now the Yugo is milled and the Soviet gun is actually kind of stamped. Then we have the same basic idea out here with barrel shrouds, a little different style of the ventilation. The Soviets have these big open ovals where the Yugoslav has round, even round stamped holes. The sights, both two-position flip sights, both have hooded post-front sights, but that's about where the similarity ends. Now let's take a look at the differences. The PPSh safety is built into the bolt handle, so what you would do is pull it to a given either open or closed position, if I can get this one to do it, and push this tab in and that'll safe the gun. The Yugoslav bolt does not have any such functionality. On this, your safety is actually this button. So it's currently on fire, pushed through that way, and I can switch it to safe by pushing it that direction. In safe, you can't open the bolt and you also can't fire the gun. So that's one difference. Disassembly is going to be different. On the PPSh, you push in on this tab and then you can pivot the gun open. On the Yugoslav gun, you actually have a removable end cap, which then allows the bolt to come out through the back of the receiver. And this gets to where these guns are substantially and fundamentally different, and that's the manufacturing techniques. So the upper assembly of the PPSh-41 is made of a few milled parts, but mostly a big heavy gauge steel stamping. You can see that the underside of the barrel shroud here doesn't quite close. They've welded it up here, but what they did was take one flat piece of steel, stamp it into this shape, and then bend it over a mandrel to form into the top half of a receiver. You then have the bottom half of the receiver down here, which you can see in there is made of a couple pieces of very heavy gauge sheet metal that have been welded together. We have more of a milled block back here. Although, yeah, I suspect that's a welded sheet in the face of the magazine well there. That's how this gun is assembled or manufactured. The Yugoslav gun is actually made from a milled tubular receiver. If we look at the front of the magazine well here, we can see that this is a solid milled part, in the back as well. And then the receiver actually stops here, and the shroud is a separate piece that's fitted in and then attached. The Yugoslav gun actually has a detachable barrel to it. I can push down on this tab, rotate the muzzle about 90 degrees, and then pull out the barrel assembly, which is connected to the front, the sort of quasi-muzzle brake that these have, and the front sight. That's an interesting feature right there. And then to disassemble the rest of the gun, we're going to push this button in, rotate this end cap about 90 degrees, and it's going to open up here with a guide rod and a long recoil spring. Pull our bolt back, pull our bolt handle out, and remove the bolt. With the receivers opened up, you can clearly see that this PPSh-41 has this heavy gauge, this style of lower and upper receiver assembly, where this Yugoslav gun is a tubular receiver. So completely different manufacturing technique, despite the fact that externally the guns have exactly the same profile. Now this continues when we look in more closely at the bolt assembly that we pulled out. This is a round bolt suitable for a tubular receiver. It is totally different from a PPSh bolt, which we have here, which is set up for a square receiver. Substantial differences there, and a little bit of a difference in the recoil springs too. That's a PPSh recoil spring. That is the Yugoslav one. What the Yugoslav gun is actually similar to is the Beretta, interestingly. So this is the bolt from a 1949 pattern Beretta, a post-war Beretta submachine gun, which is the simplified version of the Beretta, and it's very much like this simplified version of the Yugoslav gun. They both have solid tubular bolts. We've got a sear attachment or a sear stop surface on the bottom of the bolt for catching the trigger group. And that's pretty much what we have going on there. What's interesting is, from what I have seen, I have not handled an original Yugo M49. Remember, this is the 4957 simplified version. The original 49 apparently actually had a bolt very similar to the early Beretta 1938 model, where the recoil spring was captive inside of basically a tube, so that you took out the bolt and the recoil spring as a single assembly and had to do some more disassembly to actually get the spring out by itself. This made the gun simpler to disassemble. It made them more reliable in that you couldn't get stuff into the spring, but it did also make them more expensive. So during and after World War II, Beretta simplified this down to this system where you just had a large diameter recoil spring on the back of the bolt. It appears the Yugoslavs did the exact same thing in this 8-year period after the war, where they started with a captive recoil spring design and then simplified the gun to this, just like Beretta had done. Well, there is the stripped Yugoslav 4957. I'd love to get my hands on a standard Model 49 one of these days to be able to compare it, see how it differs. Really interesting, some of the design choices that they made on this. The choice to go with a PPSh exterior profile, but really a Beretta style of bolt and actual working mechanism. These did get used by the Yugoslav military, so they obviously weren't too terrible. Now by 1956, they would develop basically a visual copy of the German MP40. Interesting that they went with copies of gun, or visual copies of guns from both sides of the war there. Before we're finished entirely, let me show you the main marking on these is this Yugoslav national crest on the top of the receiver there, along with the designation M49/57. The rear sight is this 2-position flip, very simple U-notch. That 10 is for 100 meters, and we can flip it to 20 for 200 meters. The front sight is this nice big square post under a rather Mauser-like front sight hood. I showed you the safety earlier, this push button, but we also have this PPSh type fire selector lever as well. Forward is full auto, and then in the rearward position it will fire only in semi-auto. Magazine. This was a box magazine developed for the PPSh-41 by the Russians. The reason that it is single feed is because it had to be used in the PPSh-41, which was really designed around drum magazines, and drum magazines are always single feed because they only have, well, generally have one column of cartridges spinning through the drum. So the box magazine, to fit the exact same gun, also had to have a single feed mag. Big rib on the back to guide into the magazine well, and then both this and the PPSh have the exact same style of magazine release. When it's down like this, you just have a nice a lot of leverage. And then if you're using the gun, you can fold the magazine release up so that you don't inadvertently bump it and drop your magazine. That is really more useful with the large drums than it is with these stick mags. With all that disassembly in mind, now I'm really curious to take this out to the range and do some shooting with it and see how close it actually feels to a PPSh-41. Because while it looks the same, it certainly doesn't work quite the same way. So we have a whole shooting video lined up, and that will be publishing tomorrow. So if you're interested in these guns, definitely stick around and check that one out. Until then, I'd like to give a big thank you to Marstar for letting me play with, disassemble, shoot, and show you guys this Model 4957. If you're in Canada and involved in the shooting sports, definitely contact them. Take a look at what they have for surplus, guns, ammo, and all sorts of other firearms-related products. And also like to give a big thank you to my supporters on Patreon. It's thanks to you guys that I am able to travel to places like this and bring you guns like this Yugo submachine gun. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more Forgotten Weapons.